Assessing Student Learning, Course Design Essentials from the Columbia University Center for Teaching and Learning. Welcome to this video series on course design. What you will learn here will help you design or redesign a course for your teaching context and mode of delivery. This video presents assessment practices that promote learning and reflection questions to guide the design of your assessment strategy. Let's begin by revisiting the common course design process that was mentioned in the Course Design Getting Started video. In this content-centered approach, assessment is an afterthought. Since grades need to be assigned, an instructor may default to using traditional formal assessments, a midterm, a second exam or paper, and a final exam. Students may achieve the desired results, but more by luck than by design. In creating significant learning, Fink refers to this as an auditive assessment process. Students jump through assessment hoops, instructors determine if students got it or not, and assign grades. Why is this common practice? Why do we grade student work? Where is the focus on learning? Why not take a research-informed approach? To quote Bransford et al. In How People Learn, assessment and feedback are crucial for helping people learn. Assessment that is consistent with principles of learning and understanding should mirror good instruction, happen continuously but not intrusively as part of instruction, and provide information about the level of understanding that students are reaching. Yet mistakes persist when forming an assessment approach and may include assuming that a high-stakes exam is needed for evidence gathering, assuming that everything that is assessed must be graded, thinking like an activity designer, that is, selecting assessments that are fun and interesting, or asking, what test should I give based on the content I taught, and how will I give students a grade? And finally, assessments are not aligned with objectives. For instance, in a history course that has students take a final exam consisting exclusively of 100 multiple-choice questions, for a syllabus in which doing history with primary sources is stressed as an important goal, there is a misalignment between the assessment method and the objective of the course. Intentional design can help us avoid these common mistakes. Recall that the second stage of the backward design framework is to determine acceptable evidence. Stage 2 is a departure from common practice. More often, we jump to Stage 3 and design the lectures, activities, and assignments. Instead of going from target to teaching, here we ask ourselves, what would count as evidence of successful learning? How will we know if students achieve the desired results, the learning objectives? Similarly, in Fink's framework for integrated course design, instructors intentionally plan feedback and assessment practices that align with course goals. How do we design an assessment approach that enhances student learning and informs teaching? It is recommended that instructors gather evidence throughout a course and not just at mid-course and end of course, or rely on a single culminating performance task. Use a variety of methods and formats. Create opportunities for students to be involved in assessment and self-assessment of their work or performance. As part of an assessment approach, instructors may use a mix of formative and summative assessments. Formative assessments are assessments for learning. These low-stakes assessments allow us to monitor learning, give students feedback, motivate students, and guide instruction. They occur while instruction and learning are in progress. Examples include in-class discussion, polling questions, practice problems, or short reflective writing. Ideally, formative assessment is ongoing throughout a course. There's no need to wait until mid-course to assess learning. Find ideas for formative assessment in Classroom Assessment Techniques, a Handbook for College Teachers by Angelo and Cross, and Learning Assessment Techniques, a Handbook for College Faculty by Barkley and Major. Summative assessments are assessments of learning. These high-stakes assessments measure student achievement and evaluate performance. They occur after instruction. Examples include a final essay, paper, report, exam, project, portfolio, or presentation. Moving away from auditive assessment mentioned earlier, Fink argues that a learning-centered course requires a more sophisticated design approach, a set of feedback and assessment procedures he refers to as educative assessment, designed to enhance the quality of student learning. The key components are forward-looking assessment, criteria and standards, self-assessment, and feedback. Let's take a closer look at each of these components. Forward-looking assessments have students apply their knowledge and skills in authentic ways. That is, getting students to do the discipline or real-world task, simulating the ways in which a person's knowledge and skills are tested in real-world situations. Ask yourself, in what kind of situation do you expect students to need or be able to use course knowledge and skills? Recall in the previous video on articulating learning objectives, you were encouraged to identify the big ideas and core tasks that students will be asked to do in your course. For Wiggins and McTighe, assessment must be grounded in authentic performance-based tasks. Assessing students at the core requires higher-level thinking on complex, open-ended tasks, whereas on course content and skills that are important and worth being familiar with, those could be assessed using traditional quizzes and tests. Examples of authentic assessment include projects, exhibitions, portfolios, and may involve students in doing history, solving real-world problems, or conducting scientific research. Once assessment methods are determined, we clarify expectations of what exactly it is we are looking for in student responses, products, or performances. I'll know it when I see it, hear it, or read it does not help students and does not ensure grading consistency. The question asked is, what specific characteristics in students' responses, products, or performances should we examine to determine the extent to which the desired results or learning objectives were achieved? Having clear criteria will help make the evaluation process more consistent and fair. But how do we come up with the appropriate criteria and make them clear to learners? It is important to identify criteria that are central to the assessment and its purpose, not just the elements that are most noticeable. That is, not giving a research paper a high score because it has many citations, which is something easy to notice, but rather because it has well-supported arguments. Once the criteria have been identified, it is important to share them with learners. This will guide their efforts. A helpful tool for being explicit about expectation is a rubric. Rubrics can guide the evaluation and feedback process. Two general types of rubrics include holistic and analytic. Holistic rubrics provide a single score or rating for a product or performance, appropriate when overall impression is required. Analytic rubrics divide a product or performance into distinct traits or dimensions and judges each separately. Analytic rubrics provide more specific feedback. Find guidance on evaluating student learning and sample rubrics in the books Introduction to Rubrics by Stevens and Levy, Effective Grading, a Tool for Learning and Assessment in College by Volvord and Anderson, and Assessing Student Learning, a Common Sense Guide by Susky. While rubrics can be used as a feedback tool, integrating more feedback opportunities throughout a course will help students learn. Ideally, feedback should be frequent, timely, and make clear what students need to do to improve. One of the principles of learning included in How Learning Works, 7 research-based principles for smart teaching, is goal-directed practice coupled with targeted feedback enhances the quality of student learning. Similarly, for Wiggins and McTighe, learning is maximized when cycles of performance, feedback, revise, perform guide the production of known high-quality products. For this to happen, we must build these cycles into our assessment designs. Let's look at an example. Consider a summative assessment, a research paper, that is assigned at the beginning of a course and submitted at the end of a course. A grade is given, and maybe brief global comments are provided. What if the assessment was broken down into component parts, and students receive feedback from the instructor and peers, and support throughout the semester? The timeline for the research paper may look like this. Here, the instructor sets students up for success by not assuming that students know how to do research. They schedule a library research session, ask that students submit a proposal, they give targeted feedback. In-class time is set aside for workshopping and peer review. Students submit an annotated bibliography, engage in self-reflection, draft, and revise based on feedback received. By the time students submit their final paper, it's gone through multiple drafts, and they have integrated feedback received from peers and the instructor, and intentionally reflected on their work and process. This brings us to the last component of Think's educative assessment, which is to provide opportunities for students to assess their own performance in groups or individually. More broadly, deliberately focusing course assessment on learning and involving students in assessment is good practice. In Learner-Centered Teaching, 5 Key Changes to Practice, Weimer encourages instructors to change the purpose and process of evaluation to make it more learner-centered. Involving students in the process of evaluation does not mean handing over grading responsibilities to students. Students are involved in activities that develop their self- and peer assessment skills. Instructors teach these skills explicitly and give students opportunities to practice them. Other ways of involving students would be to give them choice in their assessments and getting their input on a rubric. Once the course assessment approach is in place, it is important to test the validity and reliability of our assessments. Questions to reflect on include, does the proposed evidence enable us to infer a student's knowledge, skill, or understanding? Does the evidence from Stage 2 align with our objectives from Stage 1? With your articulated course learning objectives in mind, what will you include in your assessment approach to gauge student progress toward achieving the objectives? How might you integrate formative and summative assessments? How might you involve your students? Let's recap. In this video, we focused our attention on Stage 2 of backward design to determine acceptable evidence. Assessments should align with the course learning objectives and focus on learning. As you draft your assessments, vary your approach, include authentic assessment, clarify expectations by sharing criteria or rubrics with your learners, ensure students will have opportunities to receive timely feedback and to be involved in self-assessment and/or peer assessment. This concludes assessing student learning. Please view the other videos to explore each stage of course design in more detail. For course design or redesign assistance and other teaching and learning support, please contact the CTL at columbiactl@columbia.edu.